Hello, so you probably heard me use the word type when we were talking about variables. You may say, well, but Mr. Stanton, it doesn't really matter what types we're talking about because you said we could override variables with anything. Well, that's true, but it's useful to know that Python internally does keep track of what type your variable is, and we can actually see it by printing the type, it's another function, of one of our variables. So let's see what happens here. So you can see that test 1 has a class of string or str. Well, let's do this for a couple of them. And copying and pasting, remember, is always a good idea if you're careful. So it can save you a lot of time, though. So don't be afraid of it. Just be a little bit careful with it. Make sure you change what you need to. So let's run this again real quick. And we'll see here's some different types of things. Now, for these first three, it's just the three basic types. We've got str for string. That means a series of characters or a series of letters. We have integers. That means whole numbers. And we have floats, which are floating point numbers or decimal numbers. That's like pies of the world and things like that. Anything with a decimal point. It also allows us to store very, very large numbers because it's a compact way of writing very, very large numbers, especially if you write them in scientific notation. So integers can be pretty big. They're big enough for most stuff that you need. But if you need to like talk about the stars in the sky or something like that, you probably need to use a float. Now, the last one is because there's a common error here. Let's say you want to set the price at $59. You might be tempted to put a dollar sign on here, but watch what happens. Invalid syntax. So if you wanted to display that the price was in dollars, you would actually use the string dollar sign and then the type price so that when we run module now, when we print, whoops, not the type of price, the actual price, excuse me. And when we run, we're going to see it's going to be now the $1.59. So the type that you'll use for money is either going to be int or float, but then you're going to be able to format it using some format tricks or, before we know them, simply by putting the dollar sign in front of whatever it happens to be. So we'll see some more printing tricks that'll let us format things nicer, including things like currency and things like that. But for right now, this now shows us that these are all the different types that we can have. And it is important to know what type you're dealing with because when we do math, we'll see that it's important. Is it an int times an int or a float times an int? And you certainly won't be able to do certain types of math with strings because it just doesn't make sense. Or it'll do different things than you expect because it'll use string math instead of integer math. So just be careful because the last thing that people tend to get tripped up with is this is not a number. Okay? Let's pick a different one there. This is not a number. If we use the type of test 4 here, we're going to see that this is in fact a string and not a number. And if we tried to use it for math, we would not get what we expect because test 4 is showing up as a string and not an integer or a float that we might expect to be able to do math with. So be careful of your quotation marks. They'll always turn things into strings. So that's it for now. We're going to start next time with reading input from the keyboard.